I really want to spend, I don't know, what time is it now?
So, 10:35.
Okay, good. I've got enough time because I want to have a couple minutes for questions. I want to talk about the failure of data collection in the criminal justice system. And because even the data I gave you now, once I tell you all this, it's going to make all that seem nonsensical because there's just so many problems with how the criminal justice system is collecting data. First of all, states, as you know, the criminal justice field, even in academia, is relatively new. We didn't have our first doctoral program until the 1960s, and so we really haven't been exploring it systematically through research, either at an academic level or even in an organizational level, like Pew or other organizations, until the 60s. So it's a baby in this field. So you have to try to push to get data collected, and it's not consistent, and it's mostly voluntary. So states do not routinely and systematically collect data, even on crime in general, okay? Because it's voluntary for the police departments to do that, and then it's tallied differently by each department across states, and so it's already its own issue. There are many states that don't separate Latinos from whites, or distinguish among Latino youth, looking at whether they're from Mexican, Caribbean, Central American, or South American ancestry. It's impossible then to determine the full extent of the discrepancies or the differential treatment of Latinos at any point in this criminal justice system. And it's also far more difficult then to have a comprehensive view on what's going on. And it also inflates, what we're going to talk about in a minute, I have some data here to hand out to you, is the incarceration rate of non-Hispanic white youth. And it masks how many people we actually see of color. There's several barriers that we see in the data collection. First of all, if we look at the states and federal government, many of them still do not have a Latino or Hispanic category. So then it's up to that individual how they're going to categorize themselves. And then they fail to separate ethnicity from race. So Latino youth are often counted as white, sometimes as black, which means then we're overcounting in those categories. And you're going to see how remarkably so in a minute. State personnel also have insufficient resources and or time to collect data, especially in this economy right now, where we're cutting staff out. What's going to go to the side is that data collection thing, right? So there's less resources, which means less time to even collect data now. And so we've got departmental procedures that are inconsistent. We can be in the same jurisdiction and have two different police departments collect data differently. So there's no consistency within jurisdictions, and then you go across state, and state laws vary. And then you've got the federal system. So it is a very complicated mess. States use different collecting methods. They include variations in the definitions of Latino and Hispanic. This varies from state to state. Few states have employees who are bilingual. If you want to get a job today, be a teacher who's bilingual. My husband is, and he's a wanted man because he can speak two languages, and particularly he can speak Spanish. If we fail to separate ethnicity from race, I want to give you an example of how this really messes up our data. States define Latino and ethnicity and race in a variety of ways. So let's look at youth whose father is Puerto Rican, and let's say the mother is African American. Now, in Michigan, this person would be classified as Hispanic. Okay? In California, they would be African American. And in Arizona, they would define their own race or ethnicity. And in Ohio, they would be considered biracial. That's just 4 states. I just randomly picked 4. I did Michigan because I'm from there and I knew the answer, so that was easy. But just randomly picked 4 and look. No consistency, right? So we have no uniform system that exists in this country still for defining Latinos and Hispanics in our community. And again, this is, you just can't get the extent to it. And I want to jump to this because I think, oh, this is my master's, right? Okay, so the top one, there's two charts that I think is just these are just really good examples of how you can see the fact that even what I told you, if it sounded alarming to you, it's worse than that. And even being conservative in that estimate. So look at table 11 first, and there's the source where this table comes from. This is before removing Latinos out of the white incarcerated population. So they went through and they pulled out those that were defined as white but were Latino. And this is the percentage of Latinos as actually incarcerated. Now look, it would have looked like 79.6% were white. But once we extracted Latinos and Hispanics out of that, it was actually only 48.8%. The most alarming one for me is New Mexico, who I would have thought would have had some better definitions. 83%, it looks like they incarcerate 83% white. Well, when we took out the Latinos and Hispanics out of that population, we were only incarcerating 28% white. So it looks like we're incarcerating far more whites than we actually are. And then if you look at the next one, this one I think has the federal on it. He did the white overcount of prisoners. So it shows the percentage of white prisoners reported, the actual percentage of white prisoners, and how much overcount. And again, look, New Mexico's overcount is 54.1%. So, and I tell my students this when I teach all the time, statistics are, we got to start somewhere. Don't throw statistics out with the bathwater. You have to start somewhere, but always be cautious. Always look to see how are things defined when we're looking at empirical data. We take empirical data, this is truth because it's empirical. Well, this just muddied those waters, didn't it? So we've got to start taking a look at this if we're going to understand disparity, a differential treatment, an overrepresentation, and all these things we talked about today. We have to first get consistency in how we collect data. The other thing that I want to talk about is there's a lack of cultural competency in the criminal justice system. And I remember a case where I had a young woman who was Latino, and she had violated parole, and I was working to not get her sent back to prison. And the whole time we were in front of the judge, she was looking down on the ground. Now, in American culture, what does that mean if I'm not giving you eye contact? You're disrespectful. What does that mean in Latino Hispanic culture? What are you demonstrating is respect. So right away there's a conflict. He's yelling at her. I'm trying to explain to him that he's misinterpreting. He didn't want to hear it because he knows more than anybody in that room. Okay, he's a judge, right? So she went back to prison. Simply because of her demeanor, showing a lack of respect to the system. So this lack of cultural competency, this avoiding eye contact, the bowing of the head, really looking down in the presence of authority, are things that are exuding that respect that we're demanding, but we're interpreting it in an American way. So this is just
ironic when that was what was taught to slaves. Don't look at the slave master. Look at the ground.
Yeah, exactly.
And you'll find for years, I've noticed that especially elderly black women would look down, even in the face of a store clerk. They wouldn't look in the face. I
have that problem with my neighbors. I have some older African American gentlemen who won't look me in the face, and it kills me because I understand that history, but you can't. I have